For 28 years, my parents forgot to invite me to Christmas. Not once, not twice, 28 times. I never got a call, never got a text. I always found out the same way, scrolling through Instagram, staring at photos of my entire family smiling in matching sweaters, gathered at my grandfather's beach house like I never existed. I used to wonder what I did wrong. Then I realized something worse. They didn't forget me, they erased me. Last year, my grandfather passed away. I found out the way I always did online, not from my parents. 3 weeks later, a lawyer called and told me something no one else knew. My grandfather left me the beach house, their favorite Christmas venue. The place I'd been excluded from my whole life. I didn't tell anyone. I waited. And this December, when 34 relatives showed up expecting their usual holiday, they found me at the door, with a sheriff, and the truth they'd avoided for nearly 3 decades. My name is Emily Carter, and for most of my life I wasn't the daughter who caused trouble. I wasn't rebellious. I wasn't difficult. I wasn't even openly rejected. I was simply not included. For 28 years, my parents didn't tell me I wasn't invited to Christmas. They never said the words out loud. They didn't need to. Silence did the job for them. Every December, I waited the same way I always did, checking my phone, telling myself maybe the invitation would come late this year. It never did. Instead, I found out through Instagram. Every year, like clockwork, the photos appeared on December 26th. My parents standing shoulder to shoulder, smiling in front of a decorated fireplace. My younger brother, Jason, laughing with a drink in his hand. Aunts, uncles, cousins I barely knew, all squeezed together inside my grandfather's beach house, their favorite place, their family tradition. Matching sweaters, inside jokes, captions like "so grateful for family and wouldn't trade this for the world." I would stare at those photos from my small apartment, usually eating whatever I could afford that week, the sound of my neighbor's television bleeding through the thin walls. I'd zoom in on the background, scanning for details like a detective searching for proof that I mattered. A chair left empty, a comment asking where I was. There never was. The first time I asked my mother about it, I was 12 years old. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, my feet not quite touching the floor. "Mom," I asked, trying to sound casual, "why didn't we go to Grandpa's for Christmas?" She didn't look surprised. She didn't look guilty either. She looked inconvenienced. "Oh, Emily," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "We thought you were busy. You're always so independent." Independent. That word became her favorite explanation. Every year after that, it changed slightly, just enough to sound reasonable. "We assumed you had plans. We didn't think you'd want to come. Why didn't you say something? Why didn't you just show up?" For a long time, I believed her. I told myself I must have missed something, a message that didn't send, a conversation I forgot. I blamed myself because it was easier than accepting the alternative that my absence was intentional. Jason never asked about me. Not once. When people asked him where his sister was, he'd shrug and say, "Emily likes her space." I didn't like my space. I liked being included. I just wasn't given the option. By the time I was in my early 20s, Christmas had become something I endured rather than celebrated. I stopped decorating, stopped hoping. I told friends I preferred quiet holidays, because that was easier than explaining why no one ever invited me anywhere. But one year, when I was 21, something inside me snapped. I was tired of pretending this was normal. I borrowed a friend's car and drove 6 hours to the coast without telling anyone. I rehearsed my lines the entire way. "Surprise. I missed you. I thought I'd join you this year." I imagined laughter, awkward hugs, maybe even an apology. When I knocked on the door of my grandfather's beach house, the sound of laughter inside cut off instantly. My mother opened the door and froze. "Emily?" she said, her smile vanishing. "What are you doing here?" Not "Merry Christmas." Not "I'm glad you came." Behind her, I could see everyone turning to look at me. The room felt suddenly too small, too quiet. My grandfather stared at the floor. My aunts avoided my eyes. Then I heard Jason's voice from somewhere near the kitchen. Casual, unbothered. Did anyone actually invite her? No one answered. My mother recovered quickly, the way she always did when appearances mattered. Of course you're welcome, she said too brightly, stepping aside. Come in. But nothing about that night felt welcoming. There was no place set for me at the table. Conversation stopped when I walked into a room. I caught whispers I wasn't meant to hear. Jason's girlfriend looked confused, like she hadn't known I existed until that moment. I left early the next morning, before anyone woke up. No one stopped me. No one asked why. That drive home was quiet. No music, no rehearsed speeches. Just the realization settling into my chest, heavy and undeniable. I hadn't been forgotten. I had been deliberately excluded year after year, holiday after holiday by the very people who were supposed to call me family. And once I finally understood that, everything else began to make sense. I found out my grandfather had died the same way I found out about Christmas. Online. It was a Facebook post shared by a cousin I barely recognized, someone I'd last seen when I was a teenager. A smiling photo of my grandfather standing on the porch of his beach house, sunburned and squinting into the light. Rest in peace, Grandpa. That was it. No call from my parents. No message from my brother. No warning at all. I stared at my phone, waiting for it to ring. I told myself maybe they were busy. Maybe they assumed someone else had told me. Hours passed. Then an entire day. Nothing. I learned about the funeral 2 days later from the comments section. Someone had replied. Service moved to 10 a.m. instead of noon. I checked the date. The funeral was the next morning. I drove through the night. When I arrived at the church, the parking lot was already full. Black coats, quiet conversations. I slipped inside and took a seat in the back row, my heart pounding like I was doing something wrong just by being there. The service had already started. My mother sat in the front pew, her head bowed, a tissue pressed to her face. She never turned around. Jason sat beside her, one arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders, like I didn't exist. When the priest asked for family members to stand, they all rose together, all except me. After the service, people gathered outside, exchanging hugs and condolences. I hesitated, then approached my mother when she finally stepped away from the crowd. Mom, I said softly. She looked at me, blinking in surprise, like she hadn't expected to see me at all. Oh, she said. Emily, you made it. That was the entire conversation. No hug. No, I'm glad you're here. Just you made it. As if I'd arrived late to a meeting I wasn't meant to attend, Jason glanced at me once, then looked away. No greeting. No acknowledgement. His silence felt louder than any insult. I left before the burial ended. 3 weeks passed. I was back to my routine work, home, quiet evenings when I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Is this Emily Carter? A man asked. Yes, I said cautiously. My name is Michael Harris. I was your grandfather's attorney. I need to meet with you privately. The word privately made my stomach tighten. Is something wrong? I asked. No, he said after a pause. Something is very right. But your grandfather gave specific instructions. Please don't inform your family about this call. I sat down slowly on the edge of my couch. Why? I asked. He believed this conversation needed to happen without outside influence. The lawyer replied carefully. I think you'll understand why once we speak. The next morning, I drove to his office. It was the kind of place that smelled like old books and quiet authority. The walls were lined with framed certificates and photos of smiling couples who'd probably inherited something substantial. Michael Harris was older than I expected, silver-haired with kind eyes. He shook my hand and gestured for me to sit. Before we discuss the legal matters, he said, sliding an envelope across the desk, your grandfather asked me to give you this. The envelope was cream-colored, my name written in his shaky handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single page. My dear Emily, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And before anything else happens, I need you to know something. I swallowed hard. You were the only one who visited me without asking for anything. You came when I was sick, when I was lonely, when I was afraid. You listened. You stayed. Tears blurred the words. Your parents and Jason came when it was convenient. When they wanted something, you came because you loved me. I pressed the letter to my chest. Michael Harris waited patiently. Finally, I looked up. He said not to tell my family, I whispered. Yes, the lawyer said. Because what I'm about to tell you will change things. He took a folder from his desk and placed it in front of me. Your grandfather left you the beach house. For a moment, I didn't understand what he meant. The house, he continued. The one your family uses every Christmas. The one in all those photos. My mouth went dry. He transferred ownership to you. Fully. Legally. No shared claims. I stared at the folder, my mind racing through 28 Christmases I'd spent watching that house from a distance. Why me? I asked. Michael Harris met my eyes. Because he knew exactly who had been excluded and why. I didn't tell anyone. Not my parents. Not my brother. Not a single relative. I followed my grandfather's instructions and stayed silent. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting to be invited. I was waiting for the right moment. For a long time after I left Michael Harris's office, I didn't tell a soul what I knew. Not because I was afraid. Because I was learning. I spent the first week after that meeting walking around in a fog, the letter from my grandfather folded carefully in my purse like a secret heartbeat. Every time my phone buzzed, my stomach tightened, half expecting my parents to suddenly remember I existed. They didn't. February arrived quietly. So did the paperwork. Michael called me in again, this time with documents spread neatly across his desk, deeds, titles, tax forms, all stamped and signed. He explained everything slowly, patiently, making sure I understood exactly what I was inheriting and what it meant. The property is yours the moment these are filed, he said. But your grandfather anticipated resistance. He prepared this transfer years ago and updated it multiple times. Contesting it would be extremely difficult. I nodded, barely listening. All I could think about was the house. The place I'd seen more times on my phone screen than in real life. The place my family treated like a birthright while pretending I didn't exist. By March, the house was legally mine, and no one knew. From the outside, my life looked unchanged. I went to work, I paid rent, I answered emails. I smiled at coworkers who had no idea I now owned a multi-million-dollar beach house that had never truly been mine until now. Online, my family carried on as usual. In April, my mother posted photos from Easter weekend at the beach. Jason stood on the deck, flipping burgers, a drink in his hand. My parents posed on the porch, arms linked, captioned, "Traditions never change." I stared at my phone and felt something strange settle over me. Not anger, clarity. Michael had warned me. They may continue using the property if they don't know about the transfer. If that happens, document everything. So I did. Every photo, every caption, every date. In July, my parents celebrated Jason's birthday at the house. There were balloons tied to the railing, a cake with candles, 30 people tagged in the post. I saved it. In September, an email landed in my inbox by accident or maybe carelessness. It had been forwarded to me by Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, who probably assumed I was already part of the family group chat. The beach house needs repairs, my mother had written. I'm scheduling a contractor next month. I'll handle the bill. She was arranging renovations on my house, without asking, without knowing she should. I forwarded the email to Michael immediately. Should I stop her? I asked. No, he replied calmly. Let her proceed. She's improving your asset at her own expense. In October, contractors showed up. New roofing, fresh paint, updated appliances in the kitchen. My mother paid nearly $15,000 to upgrade a property she no longer owned. I kept every invoice. By then, I had stopped feeling like a bystander. I was becoming strategic. November arrived, and with it, the familiar anticipation I'd lived with my entire life. Christmas was coming. I knew without being told that my family would be gathering at the beach house again. They always did. Michael and I met one final time before December. He laid out my options carefully. You can notify them now, he said. Or you can wait. I thought about 28 years of waiting. 28 years of being told I was independent, private, fine on my own. I'll wait, I said. He nodded. Your grandfather predicted that. He slid another envelope across the desk. Inside was a short note, written in the same familiar handwriting. Patience isn't weakness, Emily. It's preparation. That was when I made my decision. I called the county sheriff's office 1 week before Christmas. I own a property on the coast, I told the woman who answered. I have reason to believe multiple individuals will attempt to enter it without my permission on December 24th. She asked for proof. I had plenty. The deed, the will, tax records, renovation invoices, and a lawyer who knew exactly what he was doing. We scheduled a meeting for Christmas Eve morning. When I hung up the phone, my hands were shaking, but not from fear, from certainty. For 28 years, I had been waiting to be included in a family that didn't want me. Now, for the first time, I wasn't waiting for an invitation. I was waiting at the door. I arrived at the beach house on the evening of December 23rd, just as the sun was slipping into the ocean. The sky was painted in muted colors, gray-blue clouds stretched thin over the water, the kind of quiet winter sunset that feels like it's holding its breath. I parked at the edge of the gravel driveway and sat in the car for a full minute, hands resting on the steering wheel. This was the first time I'd been here in over a decade. The house looked the same from the outside. White siding, weathered wooden railings, the porch swing my grandfather used to fix every spring. From a distance, it still looked like the place where my family laughed, toasted, and pretended I didn't exist. I stepped out of the car and walked toward the front door. The key Michael Harris had given me felt heavier than it should have in my hand. It turned smoothly in the lock. That alone nearly broke me. Inside, the house smelled like salt, old wood, and something faintly citrusy cleaning products, probably. My mother had always been obsessed with making the house look perfect before Christmas, as if polish could cover history. I stood in the entryway and let the door close behind me. The sound echoed. I hadn't realized how tense I was until that moment. I exhaled slowly, the kind of breath you take when you've been holding yourself together for too long. This was my house. Not symbolically, not emotionally, legally. I walked through it room by room. The living room was exactly how I remembered it from photos. Stone fireplace, wide windows facing the ocean, a large wooden table where my family had posed year after year in matching sweaters. I could almost hear the laughter that never included me. In the kitchen, I recognized the new appliances my mother had installed. Stainless steel. Expensive. Paid for with her money. Placed in my house without permission. I ran my fingers along the countertop and felt nothing but resolve. Upstairs, the bedrooms were quiet and untouched. The master bedroom, their bedroom still held traces of my parents' presence. A sweater left behind. A pair of shoes under the bed. Proof that they'd been planning to return. They didn't know yet. I went back downstairs and set my bag by the door. Then I did the first thing I'd planned for months. I replaced the locks. The locksmith arrived just after dark. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. By the time he left, my parents' old keys were useless. I stood on the porch afterward, the cold air biting at my face, and felt something shift inside me. For the first time, I wasn't bracing myself for rejection. I was setting boundaries. That night, I barely slept. Every sound made me sit up. The wind, the creak of the house settling, waves crashing against the shore. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying memories I'd tried not to think about for years. Christmas mornings alone, phones that never rang. Photos that proved I wasn't imagining things. At dawn, I got up and showered, letting the hot water ground me. I dressed carefully, deliberately not to impress anyone, but to remind myself who I was now. I laid out the documents on the dining table. The will, the deed, tax records, contractor invoices, Michael's signed letters. I counted them twice. Then I placed 34 copies of a single document beside them. Eviction notices. Each one addressed, each one prepared. I hoped I wouldn't need them, but hope had never protected me before. At exactly 10 a.m., my phone rang. "This is Sheriff Daniel Moore," a calm voice said. "I'm about 15 minutes out." "Thank you," I replied. "I'll be ready." When he arrived, he reviewed everything carefully, his expression unreadable. He asked questions. I answered them. "This is all in order," he said finally. "You understand that once they arrive, the situation may escalate." "I do," I said. He studied me for a moment. "Are you sure you want to be present?" I thought about 28 years of absence. "Yes," I said. "I've been absent long enough." He nodded. "I'll wait nearby until they arrive." When he left to park discreetly down the road, the house fell silent again. At 11:47 a.m., I heard the first car. Then another. And another. I stood at the upstairs window and watched as the familiar procession unfolded. SUVs pulling into the driveway, doors opening, people stepping out with the casual confidence of ownership. My mother's car led the way. She stepped out wearing a cream-colored coat, her posture straight, her expression already irritated, probably about the cold or the wind or something trivial. Jason followed, laughing about something on his phone. Behind them came aunts, uncles, cousins, children, 34 people who believed this place belonged to them. They carried bags of groceries, wrapped gifts, boxes of decorations. They didn't knock. Why would they? I walked downstairs slowly, each step steady, deliberate. I reached the front door just as my mother tried her key. It didn't work. She frowned and tried again. I placed my hand on the door handle. This was it. 28 years of silence. 11 months of preparation, all narrowing to a single moment. I opened the door. And everything I had been waiting for finally stepped into the light. For a few seconds, no one spoke. I stood in the doorway, one hand resting calmly on the frame, the other hidden behind my back where I held the folder. Behind me, the house was warm and quiet. In front of me, 34 people stared like they'd just seen a ghost. My mother was the first to find her voice. "Emily?" she said sharply. "What are you doing here?" Her key was still in her hand. "I live here," I replied. She laughed. A short, disbelieving sound. "Don't be ridiculous. This is my father's house." "It was," I said. "Not anymore." Jason stepped forward, frowning. "Is this some kind of joke?" I didn't answer him. I didn't need to. My mother tried the lock again, harder this time. The metal scraped uselessly. Her irritation flared into anger. "Who changed the locks?" she demanded. I did. Her face flushed. "You had no right." I met her eyes. "Actually, I did." That was when she noticed the patrol car pulling slowly into the driveway behind them. The conversation stopped. The sheriff stepped out, calm and unhurried, his presence cutting through the confusion like a blade through fog. "Good morning," he said. "I'm Sheriff Daniel Moore." My mother's expression shifted instantly. "Officer, thank goodness you're here. My daughter is trespassing on private property. Think yous of nation oppressing. They're sent you to spy." "No," the sheriff replied evenly. "She isn't." I stepped aside so everyone could see him clearly. "This property belongs to Emily Carter," he continued. "I've reviewed the documentation personally." My mother's mouth opened, then closed again. "That's impossible," Jason said. "Grandpa would never." "He did," I said quietly. I reached behind me and brought the folder forward. Inside were copies of the will, the deed, the tax records. Everything my grandfather and his lawyer had prepared years in advance. I handed the top document to the sheriff, who glanced at it and nodded. "Ma'am," he said to my mother, "this transfer is legal and complete. The house has belonged to your daughter for nearly a year." A ripple passed through the group. Whispers. Sharp intakes of breath. Someone muttered, "Are you serious?" My mother snatched the papers from the sheriff's hands and scanned them frantically. "This isn't valid," she snapped. My father wasn't thinking clearly. "The will was reviewed by multiple professionals," the sheriff replied. "It's solid." I watched my mother's hands tremble. "This is a misunderstanding," she insisted. "Emily, we can talk about this. There's no need to involve law enforcement." I held up my hand. "We're past talking," Jason scoffed. "You really waited until Christmas Eve to pull this stunt?" "Stunt?" I repeated. "You've been coming here for 28 years without inviting me." "That's not the same thing," he said defensively. "It is to me." I took a breath and opened the folder again, pulling out the stack I'd prepared. "These are formal notices," I said, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. "You are all currently on private property without permission." I began handing them out. One by one. Some people refused to take them. Others stared at the paper like it might bite them. A few began arguing quietly among themselves. "You can't do this," my mother said, her voice rising. "It's Christmas." "I know. You're humiliating us. You erased me." The words hung between us, heavy and undeniable. She stared at me as if she didn't recognize the person standing in front of her. "You could have just talked to us," she said bitterly. "I tried," I replied. "For years, you never listened." My aunt stepped forward hesitantly. Emily, sweetheart, this feels extreme. Uh, so did being forgotten for 28 Christmases. Silence followed. Then my mother said the thing she'd never meant to say out loud. Every time I look at you, she said, her voice cracking, I see your father. The air shifted. People turned to look at her. Jason frowned. Mom, what are you talking about? She pressed her lips together, then continued, like the truth had finally forced its way out. He was a mistake, she said. Poor, unstable, a dreamer who ruined my life. And you look just like him. My chest tightened. So you punished me for it? I asked. She didn't answer. The silence around us was absolute. I felt something inside me settle, not anger, not triumph, but clarity. I didn't inherit this house to hurt you, I said. I inherited it because he loved me, because he saw me. I turned to the sheriff. Please give them the time we discussed. He nodded. You have 30 minutes to collect your belongings and leave the property. It is okay as the father's. What about the children? My cousin demanded. You're just throwing us out? There are hotels in town, I replied. I checked. My mother stared at me, searching my face for hesitation. Emily, she whispered, please. I shook my head. You had 28 years to say that. One by one, they began to move. Cars were unlocked. Trunks opened. Decorations went back into boxes. Children were ushered away, confused and quiet. Jason lingered, his jaw tight. You didn't have to do this like this, he said. Yes, I replied. I did. My mother was the last to leave the porch. She looked back once, her eyes full of something that might have been regret or might have been loss. I didn't chase her. I didn't need to. When the final car pulled away, the driveway was empty again. The sheriff approached me quietly. That took resolve, he said. No, I replied. It took preparation. He nodded, understanding. Behind me, the door to the house stood open. For the first time in my life, I stepped inside without waiting for permission, and I closed it. When the last car disappeared down the gravel road, the quiet felt unreal. For a moment, I stood exactly where I was, my hand still resting on the doorframe, listening to the sound of the ocean beyond the dunes. The wind moved through the porch rails with a low, hollow whistle. It didn't sound like victory. It sounded like an ending. The sheriff lingered a few minutes longer, finishing his notes. If anyone comes back, he said calmly, call this number. We'll handle it. Thank you, I replied. The words felt small compared to what he'd helped me do. He tipped his hat and drove away. And just like that, I was alone. Not the lonely kind I'd known for years, the kind that came from being excluded while everyone else gathered somewhere else. This was different. This was chosen. This was quiet that belonged to me. I locked the door. The click echoed through the house. I leaned my forehead against the wood and finally let myself breathe. My hands were shaking now, not from fear, not anymore, but from the release of something I'd been carrying since childhood. I slid down until I was sitting on the floor, back against the door, and stayed there until my heart stopped racing. I hadn't cried yet. That surprised me. Instead, I felt hollow. Like the storm had passed and left behind a strange, empty calm. I stood up slowly and walked through the house again, this time without the weight of anticipation pressing on my chest. The rooms felt different now. Not haunted, not borrowed. Mine. In the living room, a framed photo still sat on the coffee table, one of the Christmases I'd watched from a distance. My parents in the center, Jason smiling, 34 people squeezed together in red sweaters. No space for me. I picked it up, studied it for a long moment, then turned it face down and slid it into a drawer. In my grandfather's old bedroom, I found another frame, smaller, one I'd never seen before. It was a photo of us, him and me, sitting on the porch swing, both laughing. I remembered that day. He'd told a terrible joke and waited until I groaned before laughing harder at his own punchline. I placed that photo on the mantel, front and center. That night, my phone stayed silent. No apologies, no explanations, no sudden concern for my feelings. I slept deeply for the first time in weeks. The messages started the next day. Some were angry. You ruined Christmas. You embarrassed the family. Grandpa would be ashamed. I didn't respond. Others were quieter, more uncertain. A cousin I barely spoke to wrote, I didn't know you weren't invited all those years. I honestly thought you chose not to come. That one stayed with me. For decades, my mother had controlled the story. She'd told everyone I was independent, distant, happier alone. And because it was easier to believe her than to question the absence, they had. I understood something then. Silence doesn't just erase people. It rewrites them. 3 days after Christmas, someone knocked on the door. I froze. Then I looked through the window and saw Aunt Linda standing on the porch, her hands tucked nervously into her coat pockets. She hadn't left with the others. I remembered noticing that in the chaos, but I'd been too overwhelmed to address it. I opened the door. "May I come in?" she asked softly. I stepped aside. She looked around the living room with new eyes, as if she were seeing the house and me for the first time. "I should have spoken up," she said finally. "Years ago, I asked your mother why you were never there. She always had an answer ready. Did you believe her?" I asked. Linda nodded, tears filling her eyes. "Because it was easier." The honesty stunned me. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded note. "Your grandfather gave me this," she said. "He told me to wait until after he was gone." My hands trembled as I unfolded it. "Make sure Emily knows she wasn't imagining things," it read. It was real. I cried then. Quietly. The kind of tears that come when something inside finally feels seen. After Linda left, I sat alone by the fireplace, thinking about what came next. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want reconciliation at any cost. I wanted boundaries. Over the next few weeks, I made decisions that would have terrified the woman I used to be. I blocked my mother's number, not in anger, in protection. I sent Jason a single message. "I need space. Please respect that." He never replied. Some relatives reached out to apologize. I answered those messages. Others defended my parents. I let those go unanswered. I was done explaining myself. In January, I spoke to my employer about working remotely. They agreed. I packed up my apartment and moved into the beach house for good. The house no longer felt like a stage for other people's happiness. It felt like a beginning. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for an invitation that would never come. I was deciding who got a key. January changed the house. Not all at once, quietly. Gradually. The way healing usually does. I started with the small things. I moved the furniture so it no longer followed my mother's sense of order. I replaced the heavy curtains with lighter ones that let the winter sun spill across the floors. I painted the guest room a soft gray blue, a color my grandfather once said reminded him of calm seas. For the first time, the house felt lived in by me. Working remotely helped. My mornings began with coffee on the porch, wrapped in a sweater, watching the tide roll in and out. No notifications about family plans I wasn't part of. No photos to explain away. Just quiet, honest days. That quiet gave me space to think. For years, I believed that if I just waited long enough, if I was patient enough, my parents would eventually notice what they'd done. I thought silence was strength. That endurance would earn me a place at the table. It never did. What I was learning now was different. Silence without boundaries is surrender. Boundaries are a choice. I didn't slam the door on my family. I simply stopped holding it open. In mid-February, my phone buzzed with a message I hadn't expected. It was from Jason. "Can we talk?" I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. Yes, but not at the house. We met at a small cafe in town a few days later. Jason looked older than I remembered. Tired, less sure of himself. He arrived early and stood when he saw me, like he wasn't sure what the rules were anymore. We ordered coffee and sat in silence until he finally spoke. "I didn't know," he said. "Not really." I didn't interrupt him. "I knew Mom favored me," he continued. "I knew you weren't around much, but I honestly thought you chose it, that you didn't want to come." I studied his face, searching for defensiveness. I didn't find it, just discomfort. "Did that make sense to you?" I asked quietly. "That your sister would choose to be alone every Christmas for nearly 30 years? He winced. "No," he admitted. "It didn't. I just didn't question it." There it was again. The same answer everyone gave. It was easier not to. "I'm not here to punish you," I said. "But I need you to understand something. Not questioning it was a choice, and that choice hurt me." He nodded slowly. "I see that now." We didn't hug when we left. We didn't promise anything, but for the first time, the conversation felt honest. With my mother, there was no meeting. She called once from a different number. I recognized her voice immediately. "Emily," she said carefully, "I think we should talk." "About what?" I asked. "The house," she replied. "The family. We've all been under a lot of stress." I closed my eyes. "This isn't about stress," I said. "And the house isn't up for discussion." Her tone hardened. "You're being unreasonable." "No," I replied. "I'm being clear." Silence stretched between us. "I'm still your mother," she said finally. "And I was still your daughter," I replied. "For 28 years. She had no answer for that. I ended the call and blocked the number again. This time, my hands didn't shake. Spring arrived slowly. Aunt Linda visited often. We cooked together, walked the beach, talked about my grandfather. She never tried to defend my parents. She never asked me to forgive. She simply listened. That mattered more than any apology I'd never received. Some relatives faded away completely. Others reached out with tentative messages, questions, regrets, half-formed apologies. I responded when I felt ready. I ignored the rest. I stopped measuring my worth by who chose me. Instead, I paid attention to who showed up. In May, I hosted dinner for the first time. Not a big one. Just a few people, Linda. A close friend from work who'd gone through a rough divorce, and a neighbor who'd brought me soup when I first moved in. We ate at a table meant for 12 and laughed until the sun went down. No matching sweaters. No forced smiles. No pretending. After everyone left, I sat alone on the porch, listening to the waves, thinking about how different this felt from the Christmases I'd watched through a screen. This time, I hadn't been invited. I had invited. That was the difference. Boundaries, I was learning, weren't about shutting people out. They were about protecting what was finally mine, my peace, my time, my sense of self. I didn't need my parents' approval to exist. I didn't need their permission to belong. I already did. The first Christmas I hosted didn't look like the ones I grew up watching through a screen. There were no matching sweaters, no forced smiles, no carefully staged photos meant to prove something. There were just 4 people. Aunt Linda arrived first, carrying a casserole dish wrapped in foil and a bottle of wine she said had been sitting in her cupboard, waiting for the right moment. She hugged me the kind of way people do when they're not afraid of being seen doing it. 2 friends followed, people who had known me at my loneliest, who had shared late dinners and borrowed couches and long conversations about feeling left behind by life. They didn't ask why my parents weren't there. They didn't need to. And finally, a coworker who had mentioned, weeks earlier, that he didn't have plans. When I invited him, he looked surprised, then quietly grateful. The table was set for 12. Only 4 seats were filled. And for the first time, that felt exactly right. We cooked together, we talked, we laughed about things that had nothing to do with family drama or inheritance or old wounds. At one point, I caught myself watching the room, half expecting something to go wrong. Nothing did. Later that night, after everyone had gone to sleep, I stepped out onto the porch alone. The ocean stretched out in front of me, dark and endless, waves rolling in with a steady, familiar rhythm. The air was cold, sharp, honest. I sat in my grandfather's old chair, my chair now, and let myself think about the last year, about the 28 years before that. I used to believe that forgiveness meant pretending something never happened, that being the bigger person meant swallowing your pain and smiling anyway. That love required endurance, even when it hurt. I don't believe that anymore. Some things can't be forgiven not because you're bitter, but because forgiveness requires accountability. It requires acknowledgement. It requires change. My mother never offered any of those things, and that was something I finally accepted. I didn't hate her. That surprised me. I thought I would after everything. But hate takes energy, and I'd already spent too much of my life giving her space in my head. What I felt now was quieter. Something like acceptance mixed with resolve. She was who she was. She had made her choices, and now I was making mine. A few days later, while cleaning the living room, I noticed something tucked behind the photo frame on the mantel, the one of my grandfather and me, laughing on the porch. An envelope. My name was written on it in familiar handwriting. To be read on your first Christmas here. My hands trembled as I opened it. My dear Emily, if you're reading this, It means you finally stopped waiting for them to see you. I sat down slowly. I wish I could tell you I didn't notice what was happening. I did. I saw how you were left out, how the story was rewritten to make your absence seem like a choice. I should have fought harder. I didn't. And I'm sorry for that. Tears blurred the page. I left you this house not as revenge, but as recognition. You were never invisible to me. You mattered. You always did. Family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when it's inconvenient, when there's nothing to gain. You showed up for me. Now, show up for yourself. Living well isn't about proving anyone wrong. It's about finally living in truth. I'm proud of you. I pressed the letter to my chest and closed my eyes. For a long time, I'd believed that my biggest flaw was patience. That if I'd spoken up sooner, demanded more, things might have been different. Now I understood the truth. My weakness hadn't been patience. It had been patience without boundaries. I spent 28 years shrinking myself, thinking that if I was quiet enough, understanding enough, undemanding enough, I would eventually earn my place. I never did. Because some people don't want to see you, and no amount of waiting will change that. The lesson I carry with me now is simple, but it cost me decades to learn. Don't water dead plants. Don't knock on doors that never open. Don't beg for seats at tables where you aren't wanted. Build your own table instead. Mine is smaller, quieter, but everyone who sits there chooses to be there. And for the first time in my life, I'm not waiting for Christmas to feel included. I already am.